Welcome to the Connected Teamwork podcast by Growth Leaders Network. How do we learn to truly thrive together? How do we stay connected to our authentic selves, each other, and our purpose as a team, especially when challenged? How do we unlock the deeper levels of group intelligence? Enjoy this episode of the Connected Teamwork podcast and learn practical tools to evolve the connectedness of your team to its next level.
Welcome to this episode of the Connected Teamwork podcast, where we explore how to build connectedness in teams. I'm your host, Hilke Farber, and I'm here today with our guest, Ray Patalano. Ray, how are you today?
I'm good, Hilke. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm very delighted and grateful that you're here today. Before we're going to say a bit more about Ray, I'm going to say a little bit about this podcast and then about Ray, and then we'll dive right into the conversation. And if you're listening, this podcast series is about connected teamwork, which is basically asking ourselves, how can we build connectedness in teams, especially when the winds get a little tougher, when we get challenged? How do we stay connected to what's most important to us? What I find working with teams is that when stress goes up, what's most important to people often goes out the window. And what's not so important to them, actually their personal ego agendas, often starts driving things. And so this podcast is about learning from stories from different leaders about how do we actually turn that around and have connectedness with ourselves, with each other, and our bigger purpose as a forefront of what we do. So Ray is with us today. Very happy to say, as a person who's been in the technology industry for 30 years, he was there with the inception of Netscape, if you remember that, for those of you who are alive. Some of those who are listening might not be alive at that time. We're not alive at that time. Ray is also a trained chef and is a person who is deeply passionate about the technology and helping people to really be their best and connect to what's most important to them. He learned how to language technology into marketing and sales, which is where he currently is working. And he has learned a lot about connected teamwork during the pandemic. So Ray, welcome. Let's dive right in. And I want to hear from you tell us about what you've learned about creating connectedness in your teams, especially when things get a little bit more dicey.
Yeah, well, when you say 30 years, it sounds like a long time when we think about that. But I think I have learned a lot about connecting teams, and without using the cliches of you need to have a weekly meeting and all things like that. There's a lot of things, I think, that a lot of strategies that you put together that are, not as apparent. And one that comes to mind all the time is you can't be afraid of failure, and you can't punish failure either in your teams. It enables the team, and it creates a culture of a willingness to sort of take risks across the business. And I'll give you an example, and it's a tough example. It just happened to us last week. We were working with a company that helped us build incentives for the sales teams, right? And there was these experiential incentives, and they were really working well. The sales, we were changing behavior. We were changing the way sales sold. We were getting business out of it. It was really working well, and it was going on for about 2 years, and it wasn't cheap. And then they just abruptly went out of business. Stopped. I mean, we got no notice, no notification. They threw up a web page, said, hey, we're gone, along with a lot of marketing people who you could probably go on Reddit right now and read, who this company was, left us in the lurch. And the person who was running the program on my team, she's earlier in her career, but she's excellent. And she was on it in a second, got the legal team involved, got all the right people involved, had no fear of bringing people in and saying, we have a problem. Okay. It's easy to say, hey, we did something good, or something good happened. It's harder to say, we got a problem, we need to fix it. But if you have that no fear sort of built into your culture, they go across the business and they'll work with the other teams knowing that it's going to be okay. We're going to find a solution, right? There is not a beating at the end of this. There is, people who are willing to jump in and help. So that's sort of my number one value is do not punish failure, learn from it.
Have you been in situations where failure was punished?
Yeah, I mean, I would say all of us probably have been throughout our career. I can think back as a younger man transitioning into this business, right? You told people that I was, I'm a trained executive chef when I was a much younger man, and transitioning into technology. That's a pretty scary thing, going from a kitchen to a desk. And there were examples in some what I would call, not companies that were run as well as the one I'm at now, where, you were punished for failure, fired, let go, demoted. And that's not to say you can be reckless. Okay. So that's not what I'm advocating.
Right.
But boy, I mean, we learned a lot through this, to the sense that we're now saying, well, you know what? We learned so much. Maybe we bring this thing in house. That's the way I try to encourage the team, is we're going to learn something, right? Every time we fail. And when you create that culture, they're willing to work across the business anywhere. So that connectedness is there.
Beautiful. Does that switch automatically happen for you? Or when you got that message and saw the webpage were gone, was it an instantaneous, or did you have a moment of like, oh, okay?
Probably in parallel. It is a oh boy moment. I probably used a different word at the time, but at the same time, you jump into action, because you don't hide it, right? And another culture or a different management team, they might say, hey, we got to bury this thing.
Yeah.
We don't have, that's not how we teach across the team. And so the team is very open. It's better for the business.
Beautiful. I'm very struck by this person that works with you, who was a bit earlier in her career, being able to have the wherewithal to act that way, which tells me that your culture of actually working together and not shying away from unpleasant news must be pretty well grounded.
It is. And just because you bring it up, it actually is one of the strategies that we use for connectedness, where we take the senior members of the team. Forced is the wrong word. I'd say highly encouraged, to make sure that the earlier in career folks are under a wing of somebody, and I hesitate to call it true mentorship, right? But there's a lot of stuff that happens organically, where the senior members of the team are expected to coach. They're expected to intervene and to help. And that creates a willingness from the earlier in career folks to actually go to them with problems before it gets to me, or with questions or strategies. They have somebody to trust to bounce it off of. And there's no fear of doing it, right? So all of this trickles together. Like once you start putting all these strategies together, they all work in a big way to make sure that the team is always in one motion. But that is a big one for me, is the senior team members have to make sure that the earlier in career folks are ready, because if you don't, then we don't have a succession plan. And that's a big problem, right? We pride ourselves on having that at all times.
So that sense of connectedness is always here. It's being able to suggest that we're going to, for example, take each other under our wing, especially for younger people or for more early in career people. Doing that creates a sense of context, of safety, and of a space to experiment, because I'm taken care of. Like I can have something to take, like I can almost feel myself relaxing in my chair as I listen to you. So it's sort of like, yeah, I know, like it's taken care of, right? And so often that doesn't happen. So people are then left to their own devices and their little fight, flight, freeze brains that go AWOL. So Ray, tell us about how you then encourage experimentation.
Yeah. It's going to sound cliche when I say it, but you have to empower people with very few limitations. And we all use the word empowerment, right? So everybody talks about empowerment.
Right.
But you have to empower with very few limitations. What I mean by that is you obviously can't give somebody, it's their first day in the company and say, here's $1 million budget, go off and go crazy. Okay. But nobody believes that. But what you can't be, and I believe this strongly, is you cannot say you empower people and then be over them, micromanaging them and trying to encourage each or try to shape each decision. What we do, and what I feel strongly about, is that you make them reflect back and forth on it. So why'd you make that decision? Why do you think that's the right thing to do? Tell me about it, right? Tell me what your thought process is. And in that, you can reshape the conversation. You can shape what they're going to do and show them, hey, you know what? This is a great path, but maybe if you did it differently, this would be better, okay? Or you're going to have a learning experience out of this. Mm-hmm. So you've got to empower, and you've got to be super comfortable with empowerment. And I think, looking across my career, that's one thing where I feel like I've done really well with a leadership team is the ones who were empowering, and when I've not done so well are the ones who weren't. Right? I think that was always the difference, because when they're empowered, they get a sense that they can try new things, and then the other folks who are around them will work with them because they're not afraid. Right? They will say, "Wow, they're empowered. I feel empowered to do it. Let's go try something."
Yeah,
that's what you have to encourage.
What might have led you to disempower others? Like, what might have seduced you to not do these things that you've now been doing over the last years, maybe decades? Like, what process have you been going through to make sure you don't do this anymore?
Oh, to make sure I don't do it. Look, I think you have to get real comfortable with the folks doing small projects first and sort of winning that empowerment as they go forward. I'm not going to use the analogy like a child, right? You sort of trust them as they grow. But in our field, we're face first with the customers in a field marketing role. Field marketing is very different than what you would call, traditional corporate marketing. No offense to my corporate marketing friends. They do a wonderful job, but we're customer facing. So you've got to earn that trust with the field, because you don't get the opportunity to make a lot of mistakes. And so what we do is we give projects right away. We don't have a sandbox here in field marketing, right? You're out there in front of the customers right away. We give them the opportunity to succeed first. We don't put them in situations where they're going to fail or the project's too big, and they grow into it. And that has seemed to work really, really well. We're to the point now, when I look across our team, that earlier in career phase, sort of, that they're sort of 2 to 5 years out before they get to a management position, is the strongest I've ever seen it.
That sense of giving people small projects that they can, bite their teeth in, sink their teeth in, and learn from that place, and then see how they do, and that builds confidence both within them and with you, and then you grow together. I think that's
exactly
that's very clear. So the other part of this is because, looking at myself or looking at other leaders that I coach, I often see the tendency to disempower, wittingly or unwittingly, right? So can you tell a little bit about what you discovered about the ways in which you may have disempowered people in the past and what you learned from that?
I think coming up in when I was earlier in my career, I can think of times when I would have been probably too hands-on. Right? Because not only is it a trust thing, but, I think back to some of the earlier campaigns I did as a younger man. Your name's on it. You want it to be correct because it affects your credibility. And so as you're working with somebody else or you're managing somebody else, you want to make sure that reflection of what they're doing is a reflection on you. What I have learned, though, as I've grown, and, obviously as you get older, you get wiser, is that not everything you do is the correct way. Me personally, right? When I look at things, and I've done this with my kids, and you probably do it too if you have kids, is that, even though they're part of you, they're not going to do everything the same way. The result might be just as good, but you have to be willing to do that and let that go. And so that was a hard learning lesson for me as a younger man and as a younger manager too, is to say, look, I'm looking for the outcome, right? How we get there can be a lot of different ways. Okay, and that's tough to learn, but as you learn it as a manager, you get much stronger as a leader too. When you accept that.
Yeah. We're going to take a short break in just a moment, and when we come back after the break, Ray, we're going to I'd like to explore more with you what you've learned in terms of building connectedness, and maybe some other ways that we really have helped you to build connectedness in team besides this theme we're talking about today already, which is really empowering people and helping people feel safe to learn from failure. So thank you so much. You're listening to the Connected Teamwork podcast with Ray Patolano, a technology veteran, 30 years from Siena, and also a professional chef. So I want to hear more about that as well after the break.
Sounds good.
You are listening to the Connected Teamwork podcast by Growth Leaders Network. Do you want to learn more about building the next level of connectedness in your team? Please contact Growth Leaders Network on LinkedIn. And now, back to the show.
Well, welcome back. Connected Teamwork Podcast. Hilke Faber, host, Ray Patalano, guest. Today, talking about connected teamwork, we talked a lot about how do we build connectedness and the freedom to experiment by empowering people, by having people give them a sense of I have mentorship, or at least a person that guides me that I can rely on. What are other things that you've noticed in building connectedness, especially when things get dicey, Ray?
I think one of the things that's worked pretty well for us, and this is a fairly new concept, although some people might disagree that that's new, but it's new for us, is the concept of a ride along, right? Where you don't necessarily go into a cross-functional role, where there are those things where you work in a department for a period of time and then you move over into a different department. What we've done, and I really like it, is taking people from different parts of the business, and they do ride-alongs with us in the campaign, at a customer visit, at an event. And they understand what we do out in the field, and they understand what our cares about are, right? And what actually makes us tick. At the same time, we see why they ask us the questions they ask us, right? So when we're working with brand and corporate marketing, and they're asking us questions, and to us, it's clear as day why this has to happen. But to them, they're saying, "Well, I don't understand it." And there's always sort of this weird disconnect. And we said, you know what, let's try this. Let's send people, into a brand meeting. Let's send brand out in the field with the field marketers and get them to understand what we're doing. And then what happens is you have this liaison in the other team. And they both start to connect on a different level because now they understand each other. And I know that sounds simplistic, but you'd be surprised at how powerful that is too. It doesn't cost a lot, and you don't have to move somebody out of a role. It's in addition sort of to what they're doing, but they enjoy it because they get a fresh perspective on it. And I feel like, if anything, that's made a big difference with some of the functional groups who just don't really understand the field. And that goes for sales or field marketing. But, can you imagine doing that with a finance person? What a whole different world would be for them. And then them coming back to us and say, well, I understand why you do it, but this is why I need that documentation that you don't care about. Yeah. And so it brings a whole different level of connectedness because you now understand their perspective.
It really puts you in the other person's chair, literally, right, because you're sitting with them as opposed to staying in your own world and thinking about, what do I need from these people that I'm not getting, and why am I not getting that? And I'm actually seeing something very different. Curious, do your field people also go to the functions or the home office right along?
They do. And that was the other part of it, is they, it's not always about us, right? They can come and say, hey, we're customer facing. You get this, you can get an attitude very quickly of, I'm customer facing, so everything I do is super important. That may be true. Okay, but that doesn't negate that everybody else has an important job to do, and we all have an important job to do for the customer. And I think what they learned, one example of it was as we were rolling out a new program, there was a tax implication. So we had to get on the phone with the tax people inside the company. And, the field marketing person who was on our team got up and she started talking about what we're doing with this product line and why we're doing it, all stuff that's very instinctive to her and to the sales team. And I could see the look on the face of the tax people where they're like, and I just kind of stopped the conversation. I said, let me just stop it here and say, do any of you understand the products and the services she's talking about? And they said, no, because it's not their job to understand the technology, right? They don't know. It's not their job to understand tax. And so that was key learning for our field marketing team. Is I said, you need to go sit with these people and understand why they care about what a 1099 is, why they care about, what the tax implications in another country are. And it was real eye-opening for us. And now what was funny is, so now I have a tax specialist on my field marketing team because she sat through so many of these meetings with them. When we have issues with the stuff that we're going to roll out, we think there's tax implications. She's now our subject matter expert.
Brilliant.
Right.
I also can sense that maybe there may be a little discomfort doing that at first, but then I sense a sense of inspiration or even enthusiasm that might come from actually doing that, because I'm starting to learn something about you, and that I think is eye-opening and is good for humans to do that.
Oh, 100%. I think you mapped out probably the progression correctly. At first, it's like, there's no way. I don't want to go do that. And then after a while, at the end of it, they're like, boy, I'm really glad I did that.
Yeah.
Because now I understand. And so, when they go, now we have another campaign or they're doing some other work, those things are buttoned up by the time they get to that person. And the other person's very appreciative of it. So there, that's the connectedness, right? They now know there's a connection. They understand what the two of them are doing. So it's, you can do all the meetings in the world and you can do all the sort of, lunch and greets, whatever you want to do. But until you sort of build some of these processes and get people out of there, I hate to use the word, out of that comfort zone, they don't grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Out of the comfort zone into the other person's chair. I really like this idea. Ray, we're living in a world that's become hybrid, increasingly so. For some of us, way before COVID, at least that was the way it was for me, and for many of my clients these days, it's their new reality. Like a couple days a week in the office, no days a week in the office. How is that for you, and how do you build connectedness in this hybrid setting?
Yeah, it's funny. We've always been a hybrid organization before that term was cool. So for the last 17 years, I've been very, very used to it. So a couple of things that we do, I think, that work in a hybrid environment. At the beginning of the year, everybody's given a budget to sort of do what I call these pod type meetings. So if there's a couple of people who live in Denver and, one might be a manager, one might be in early in career, one's not, I empower my people and the people on our team. Hey, if you want to go set up lunch for 5 or 6 people who are in that area and you guys want to have a talk, for a couple of hours, I don't care if they're from finance, order entry. It doesn't have to be just marketing, but they connect and they get together and they talk about stuff. If any of us are going to a local office, we make sure that the other people on the team know we're going to be at the local office. If I'm going to be there, even if it's just for a couple of hours, I let people know if they want to pop in, have a face-to-face chat. That's been pretty effective for us because we had a lot of offices before. We don't anymore. I mean, that was the change for I think the hybrid environment, is people have started to realize, real estate is not that important in the sense that you don't need an office for people. We've got enough tools now. From when I started in technology 30 years ago, the tool set is completely different. I mean, look what we're doing right now.
Right.
Well, I won't date you, but I'm sure you remember what video conferencing was like in 1999.
It was costing $10,000 for 1 hour in New York City.
That's right.
And I had to travel and had to set it up a month in advance.
Right. So the tool set's completely different. So it's much easier to stay connected in that environment. I will tell you though, this may sound controversial, but as far as events go and all these other things, face-to-face events, there was this big sort of thought process in COVID that everything would be hybrid, right? Every event would be hybrid from now on. I don't see it. I see a full force of people going back to face-to-face, in person, at these types of events. And that's what they're not saying, hey, I want to go watch it on the web. I'm not going to go to the show. I mean, I've seen show attendance quadrupling from what I've seen over the last couple of years. So I think the work environment, people really like the hybrid piece. And then the piece where they want to get together with their customers and they want to see their customers and they want to see their vendors, that not so much. That still seems to be pretty face-to-face.
I understand. And also this being organic and creative about how you create this personal in-person connection. Yeah. We can do all the research around it. I had an experience last Friday, actually, where I met a client of mine who I've been working with for 3 years for the first time in person. And it was interesting because there's the experience you and I are having right now. We're seeing each other on the screen, and there's still quite a bit of relatedness, but there's still, now that I've met him in person, something in me knows something different about him.
Yeah.
And I don't quite even know what we'll call that, but something in me knows something different. And I'm not going to deny that that's true.
You know what my speculation on that is, because we have the same thing, right? I hired a bunch of people during COVID. I didn't meet them for 3 years. When we finally got back together at our annual sales meeting. And I think it's the body language from here up is different from the body language from the rest of us, right? And I think as people, we pick up different elements from somebody's body language as they're walking, how they move, things like that. And you feel connected to them in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating. I'm sure as we get further in this technology, maybe 30 years from now, they'll look back at these calls like, do you remember when this was still two-dimensional, a little picture where we just saw faces? Yeah. Wow, was that primitive?
I believe it.
Right? You'll be probably standing next to me in my room right now in some kind of thing that I don't have a word for. Maybe there's a word for it already. I don't know. But that's beyond the point. So amazingly, we're already getting towards the last few minutes of this podcast, Ray. So as you look around you, as you look around where business is going, where society is going,
Yep.
and look in your heart where you're going, what is most important to you when you think about connectedness in teams and the people around you? What's most important to you?
I think, when you think about connecting people wanting to be connecting with each other, you have to let people be authentic, and you have to embrace authenticity. And it's not always easy, and it's not always pretty. We're all super, super different. If you really want a connected team, you've got to kind of embrace everybody's cliques. We're all different, right? I am a pretty sizable guy. I have a pretty rough looking face when people see me in person. Then they realize I'm actually very nice. But there's these first impressions that come off, and you can't let those guide how you make decisions. And you can't let the team use those first impressions. You've got to accept people and meet with them where they are. And I think that's the biggest part. You can put all the processes in place, right, that you can build. But if you don't sort of accept people where they are and kind of work from there out, and you really understand what their gifts are going to be, it's very difficult to connect to people. And we all come from very different cultures, right? When you're leading a global team, mine's just the Americas right now. But when you're leading, cross-functional teams across all these different cultures, you've got to take a moment to step back and say, all right, they're coming at it from a different angle. How do I appreciate that? And that's a learning that takes, in my opinion, some people are gifted at it. It took me years to really, really gain, So I think that's the meet people where they are and embrace authenticity. Embrace the fact that people are different and who they are.
Meet people where they are. Embrace the authenticity and the diversity and authenticity in that. And of course, these words could be overused. And I really sense from you, Ray, that you've been practicing that. And as you talked about that, I was thinking, like, who doesn't want to be accepted? And who couldn't use in their lives a little bit more acceptance of who they are? Most people are on this journey of not quite feeling totally confident in all situations at all times. So if we can help each other with that, I think that's a tremendous gift that we can give to each other. And then from there, all the great things happen.
They do, 100%. That's where it starts, right? You work with people. And when you understand, acceptance is a great word, really good word.
Great word. Final question. So what would you say to somebody where they're saying, well, yeah, my team feels very disconnected right now. I just don't know where to start. What would you tell them?
Start with one thing. Tackle one thing. I think we talked about some strategies today, right? And, do you punish failure? Do you not empower your people? Undo all the things we just talked about. But start with one thing. I mean, that's the way I break problems down, or the way I tackle things is, okay, if it's insurmountable, break the mountains down, right? And start small. I mean, that's what's worked for me over these years. I don't believe I'm, any smarter or any stronger than any of the other managers in high tech. But problem solving, that's the way I do it. Break it into chunks. It's when you got to clean a big house and you're like, man, I don't want to do it. You do one room at a time, right? And I think that works. So that would be my advice. Start small. You can do it. If I can do it, anybody can do it.
Start small. One thing at a time, and take one technique. And then I also hear in that, Ray, don't wait for the perfect technique, skill, or approach. Do something and start with something with that intention. Yeah.
Velocity is always better than accuracy. Not to say to be careless, but it's sort of velocity is always better than accuracy.
Beautiful.
In my opinion.
Thank you for that, Ray. It's been a true delight to speak with you today, Ray, about connectedness. I learned a lot about what happens when we really embrace failures for others and for ourselves, to create a culture of taking care of each other, putting people underneath our wings that may need a little bit more help from early in career. Also, the power of acceptance that we talked about at the end, and really helping people to understand, helping people to accept themselves more, understanding that we're all different. So thank you so much, Ray.
Thanks, Helga. Great to join you.
Wonderful. Well, this has been a Delight Connected Teamwork podcast. We're here almost every Monday. I'm your host, Helga Faber, and we are working here to explore more ways to build truly connected teams and individuals. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Connected Teamwork podcast by Growth Leaders Network. Take a moment to reflect on what you learned today that can help build your team. Also, if you like, think about one of your team members and what you appreciate about them. Let them know. Enjoy connecting more deeply to what is great about them. And see you next time at the Connected Teamwork podcast.